So I'll try and fly through these slides. Okay, so yeah, basically I run Codera, which is a small software house in Leeds. And you may remember me from last year's test Atelier when I did a talk as well. Ooh, you're slow. So what we're going to do is we're going to do TDD in Excel, which is based upon a presentation that Clark Ching did at XP Programming Club, May 2007. So perhaps Neil, who's in the other room, might remember that session. Exactly 10 days, 10 years, maybe to the same Tuesday. I think it used to be Tuesdays, XP Club. Audience participation, talked about that. And yep, assisted by Leah and Shazza. Really slow to change directions. So what's the problem we're going to look at? We're going to do a Roman numeral converter in Excel, VBA, and we're going to do it TDD. So before we start, can you put your hand up if you're a tester? Oh, wow. If you're a developer, a couple of developers. Oh, yeah, good answers. And something else, looking at Clem. Okay, so do we all know what TDD is? I'm sure we've all heard TDD. Do we all know what TDD is? Is that an unfair question? Do your developers all say they do TDD? Pretend. I bet they don't. I bet they do test after. Very few developers stick with TDD and do TDD. So I find that I have to literally bad cop it when I try and get people to do TDD. Is that fair, Shazza, Leah? Because they kind of get the science, but they don't stick with it. And the analogy I now use, it's like touch typing. Once you've learned to touch type, you never go back to one-finger typing. So once you can touch type, then you can discuss with me about whether touch typing is a good or a bad thing to do. So basically TDD, the idea is that we add a test, we see a red bar, then we fix the code, so we see a green bar, then we refactor the code, and we repeat forever. And this demo is actually as much about refactoring as it is about TDD. Okay, JFDI. So what I'll do quickly, oh, it split my screen. That's a bit annoying. Is it easier if you just set whoever's going to go next door, you just take them now and set it up, rather than me talking through it? Or do we just set them up? You want to set them up, or you want me to show how to set it up? Either. So quickly, if you want to do this, the first thing you need to do is you need to add the developer tools onto your tab. So that is File, Options, Files, Options, Customize Ribbon, Developer Checkbox. So there'll be a developer checkbox on there. I'm sure Leah and Shazza have practiced that, so they can show you how to do that.
Right-hand side. Yeah, it's already there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've already got it, yeah, because I practiced it last night, very late last night. You need to create a macro-enabled workbook. I haven't worked out how to do that yet in Excel, so I just open Excel, I then save as. It's the only way I can work out how to do it. You need to allow your macros to run. I'm setting autosave on, and the reason I'm going to do that is because autosave every 10 minutes. About every second time I do this demo, I will create an infinite loop, which largely just breaks Windows and loses your Excel spreadsheet. So that's the fun part for you, to see if I actually break and require me to reboot. The language will be rewarding, I'm sure, if I go down that world. Yep. Oh, yeah, and then I've done a couple of other things. And so what I've also done in my VBA window, I've added comment and uncomment blocks. So the way to do that, Leah and Shazza, is going to VBA, View, Toolbars, Customize, Commands. Got all that? Then add comment blocks. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is Roman numeral converter. So we're going to have an input. So the input, I'm guessing, is 1. We will have an expected. So I guess Roman numerals. It's I. We will have an actual. So for now, that's blank. And then we will have a test. So our test will be something along the lines of if expected, so sorry, that if's wrong. There'll be a lot of apologizing in this, as I probably one of the most frustrating people in the world to pair with. So if B2 is equal to C2, then we're going to do pass. And if it's not, then it's a fail. So currently it's failing. We can do a bit better than that though, so we'll do a conditional, conditional formatting. So we're going to highlight the cell color. If it's equal to, no, must be equal to fail. Oh, it fills it in for me. How clever are you, Microsoft? And then we'll, just as an aside, if you did ever come to work for Codera, I wouldn't make you work in Excel. Although to be
lives in Excel.
well, maybe they can do this. And then do conditional format, highlight cells. If it's equal to pass, as Excel doesn't know that pass should be green, then we'll do green fill. And if I hard code that in, okay, so we have a start the test. So what I will now do is I will create my macro. So I've had a slight problem getting the font bigger, so I'm afraid I can't get any bigger than that at the moment. What I've done here is I've done a file, new module, clicked it, which gives you this blank screen here. So in here, I'm going to do a function Roman numeral converter. And the way that works is we will return jobber. Oops. Oh, that's interesting. Book 1 XLS, actually Control S. Okay, so just doing there. Why is that trying to save? Okay. So remember all that work I've just done. File save as desktop. So the bit I didn't step through was that. Has that worked? Oh, maybe that's worked. And now if I go to the developer tab, Visual Basic, can I save? Yes, I can save. So I'm hoping if I go in here and do marvelous, except it didn't autocomplete very well, did it? Okay, so hopefully the code is fairly clear. So I've created a function in VBA called Roman numeral converter, and I've called that function, and currently that function returns jobber, and it should return oops, sorry, I'll try and slow down so you don't get seasick. I'm not quite sure why it's beeping at me at the moment. I think that was to do with focus. Yeah. So that should return I. So now if I do that line again, passes. One last thing I need to do, and then I'll release anyone who's brave enough to do it on their own. Application.volatile. And what that does is it just basically tells the macro to recalculate every time a cell changes. Otherwise, you'll spend your time trying to work out, did that change make a difference? If we carry on, then the way we work in TDD is we create a test, and we see it fail, and then we work out how to test it. One of the things I'm going to do now, which will be a little bit it's quite hard about TDD, is, so I need to pass in a variable. So now I've got only got one method call, and they both return the same thing. So what I'll have to do is pass in a method, a variable here. So we will, I know, n as integer. You'll see those dialogues quite a lot because so that's saying it's going to return a string, although it's optional. So what we'll now do is if n is equal to 1, don't think you need the brackets, if n equals 1, then Roman numeral equals endif. Doesn't auto-indent for me. So is everyone happy with that code? Do I need to explain that to anyone? It's all hopefully fairly simple. So now I've saved that, rerun my tests. The way I can do that is just by changing a value. It's telling me that doesn't work because it hasn't got a parameter in there. So the input is A2. That one now works. Control D, really useful shortcut in Excel, copies the cell above. So that now works as expected. So we've got a red bar, so we can fix the red bar. So this is the kind of the frustrating part of the talk. So I'm going to go a little bit further than I ever want to, but actually it's quite an important part of TDD. So one of the things I'm hoping to show is I'm not really thinking about how I'm going to design the system. So if I do F9, functions are on. I can use F9 to update. That passes. So again, I'm not coding any further forward than I need to, and I'm not thinking about how I'm going to design the system. Everybody who starts to program, they want to understand the problem and they want to fix the problem. And that's not really what TDD is teaching us. TDD is telling us that what we do is we kind of define the problem and then we do the simplest thing possible to pass. And then out of the bottom, if we're lucky or good at what we're doing, what we'll see is the solution pop out. And it's not always the solution that you might have come up with if you'd have done it yourself from first principles. So I'm going to, whoops. Now, this is the point here when we've got tests that are passing, or we will have in a second, where you start to, there's a decision to be made about when do you refactor. And there's a tendency already for people to refactor, and I can kind of see that we've got the starts of a pattern developing. But I'm going to take it to 8, just to be really frustrating. I'm going to try really hard to do it like this. Because what I want people to do is that I want them to look at I don't want them to assume how to solve a problem too soon, because then you kind of prematurely optimize and you don't really understand the problem. And I get that this is a bit of a false scenario. Okay, so we've got a fail. So when that's equal to 4, that should be equal to 4. If n is equal to 4, then it's equal to 5. If you see me make mistakes, please shout up. Oops, that was F5, not F9. Oops. The thing I always want to do with this talk as well was actually ask somebody to do it the night before without doing it the TDD way, just to see what they came up with. I think that would be really interesting. Two more, nearly there, then we'll do something a bit more interesting. No, I see I've failed. I've put the code in before I've done the test. Seven. And finally, oh no. So at this point, looking at this code, has anyone got anything in there that they would look at from a refactoring point of view when I get the test to pass? When I get the test to pass. Same thing I did last time? Yep.
There's a lot of duplication in the tests, isn't
Well, these are the tests, so in the code, in the
yeah,
implementation.
In the code, I mean, sorry.
Absolutely, there's a lot of duplication.
Yeah, I'd look at that.
Brilliant.
I'm not going to go through and do that with all the Roman.
That would be a valid solution. If you could go up to, I can't remember what the biggest Roman numeral is, I think it's about 2,500, 3,000 or something. So, oh, I thought I'd turned off all my alerts. Obviously not. Is that Skype? Quit. I get, obviously, yes, sweary alerts from time to time from people, some commercially sensitive, so I'm trying not to. Okay, so looking at these here, I can see a little pattern, 1, 2, 3. So I'm thinking that looks a bit like a loop. So I'll move those to the bottom. And what I'm going to do then is I can kind of do, I'm thinking a while loop. So the way we do while loops is do while n is 1, 2, or 3. So n is, whoops, greater than or equal to 1. And n is less than or equal to 3. You don't do thens, because that would be consistent. You just do a wend, rather than an end if, because that would... And what we'll do now is we will do Roman... This is where I normally call it ITOR, but it's not a very good name. Because every time I do this demonstration, I spend the night before rerunning it when I remember how to write VB, and I get just as frustrated as I ever did trying to do it. It is a lovely demo, though. And look now, my innovation of I can uncomment code, I can comment code out. So, ooh, that wouldn't work. That would have been an infinite loop, maybe? Yeah. So that's the first one that we've dodged. Okay, so what I'm saying there is that the return from this function is equal to the return from this function plus an I, and that n is equal to n minus 1. All fairly clear. And I expect that just to pass. It did, but it wasn't very obvious, so I'll just change that field to make sure it did pass. So that's cool. And it kind of looks like we've got a similar pattern here. So I'm probably going to attack that one next, with your permission. Sorry, same pattern. Yeah, sorry, the same pattern here. Here. In fact, here. So let's try and do... I'll do it as a while loop. I could do it as an if loop. But what we'll do is that while n is greater than 3 and n is less than or equal to 8, wend. What we need to do there is... Now, one of the things that changes a little bit when you do TDD is quite often, if you're doing the tests, I don't really need to think about what the code does, which sounds a bit bonkers. Let me explain that a bit more. And then there we would say that n equals n minus 5. Comment out those. So what I mean is that typically if I'm writing code about tests, every time I make a change, I kind of have to balance the code that's there and work out intellectually, follow it through in my head. And when I'm doing test-driven, what I tend to do is, yeah, that should work, and I just run the tests. Obviously, if I've got quick tests, it tells me if it works or not. So,
problem there, don't you? Because you've got the 4 up the top, you've got the 3 and the 8 below, so you've got 2 code paths for 4.
Okay, so let's see what happens.
Oh, sorry.
So we get a
I was
fail.
getting excited.
Well, no, but that's great, because so there's a couple of things gone on here. So the first thing I've got a typo, which is the V's, so we can fix that one quite quickly. And again, this is why I don't tend to, that double checking that you did, so that intellectual exercise where you're actually following the code through, I kind of have lost that. So I just set it up, test it, and see whether it works or not. And maybe that's made me lazy. And I don't always have people to help me. So there's definitely something wrong with 4. So if n equals 4, then it's equal to that, while n is greater than 3. Do you reckon that'll fix it? Yeah. So just get rid of this code now. Okay, so what we'll do now is, I'm actually doing okay for time. So there's a function in Excel I found out the second time I did this, and you might have spotted earlier, called Roman. Why, I don't know. So Microsoft have actually done this for me. So there isn't a compelling business case to go back and write this function for you, because Excel have already done it. They prefer uppercase. I think that's lower. So 9 fails. So let's just get 9 to pass. If that's equal to 9, we know it's IX. Okay, 10. Okay, 10 fails. So again, so I kind of know in my own head that 10's one of those that is going to be repeated. So we could now do a little bit of dragging, see where our next failure is. Go down to 20. Oops. Okay, gone too far. So that was a mistake. So what I'm going to do is 11 failed, which I didn't think it would. So we'll fix that one first. I did this once, well, actually the first time that Clark did it, he did it with a guy called Ralph, who used to be a tester with me at Aerodyne, and he's a brilliant tester. And what Clark did, which I thought was a lot braver than me, was he invited people to come up and write the VBA code. And at one point, we did a very strict 1 test, 1 pass. And he passed it to Ralph, who is this superb tester. And the second that Ralph got his hands on the keyboard, he put about 20 tests in that all failed. So he knew all of the edge cases for the Roman numerals, because that's the sort of guy he was. So you went from having 1 test that was failing to having 12 or 15 tests that were failing. And then all of a sudden you'd lost what it was you were working on. So whilst they were all completely valid and actually very good edge cases, the fact that you'd gone from this 1 failing test to lots of tests meant the problem was a lot harder to look at. And I thought that was really interesting. There's a point to that story, but I thought it was interesting. So I think we can fix that by do you want to suggest a fix? N equals n minus 10. We are starting to get a pattern here, aren't we? F9. If I copied that down.
Still an F equals 10.
If n is equal to 10 and it's not, okay. Good point. That's why we pair program. Although this would be quite an expensive way to pair program, wouldn't it, in terms of resource. Thank you, sir. So I suspect now we'll get up to 19. or 14. So (14) fails if n is equal to 4, because it's just saying there that it's equal to, it hasn't added the x. I suspect we'll have the same problem there at some point as well. But again, looking at the code, the tendency from a developer would be that I'll just add that in now, but I've got no failing test that forces that. So again, that's an anti-pattern. Because the contract is what the test's saying. So without having the test that proves the failure scenario, if I put this code in, it's kind of invalid. And the reason is because if I did that now, it'll fix it. I think we can all probably see that, yeah, if I just copy that line down. Oh, didn't fix it. There we go. So without that line though, if I was without that test, as a developer, if I looked at this code, didn't want to start you, go away please. If I look at this code and you're like, well, what's that doing? And delete it. No tests are broken, so it's a valid refactor really. So again, that's why we should always be having the test first to force the developer. So it's almost protection. So it's not just about getting the right functionality, it's about protecting someone else or from refactoring code later on because you've got untested code. So I could probably do a Control Z there, couldn't I? So we now get the fail. So now we're allowed to fix it. And if I do an F9, hopefully that will fix. So I suspect if we take us to 21, and then we'll do another refactor. If I get to 21, I don't know if I'll get to 21. So we have a similar problem there. So for 9, if that's equal to 9, then it's another concatenation problem. So you can see we're going to have this similar problem in here somewhere. So hopefully that'll just pass that one. Now we see the same with XXX. And we see we've got the same pattern for the X's as we do for the I's. So we can probably look at this code here. So rather than saying if, we say while capital W, while when. So that I expect it to still fail, and it's because we've got the concatenation thing in. So again, hopefully what you're seeing is I'm not really thinking, just letting the process guide me. That's passed. Okay, so we can carry on, but what we'll do now is going back to the excellent point that Gwen made about repeated code. Again, we're starting to see the same code repeated. So these look similar, and these look similar as well. So I'm going to try and refactor out this to start off with. So refactoring, we're all happy with the idea of refactoring. So refactoring is when we change code, but we don't change functionality. So there's no functional change to the code. It's just a change to the layout of the code. Refactoring can be quite emotive. So lots of people will talk about refactoring, and you'll hear why are you refactoring code? Why don't you just write it properly first time? Why are you spending your time refactoring it? Or lots of people who use refactoring as an excuse to change the behavior of code. That's not refactoring, that's changing shit. Refactoring means that functionally it stays the same. Refactoring is really important. So hands up if you're working in an agile, whatever that means environment. About more than half the room now. Hasn't IT progressed? One of the playoffs with Agile for me is the idea that you deliver early. So that's great. The customer gets feedback quicker. One of the costs is that you don't spend a lot of time up front doing analysis. Now, in my own opinion, a lot of that upfront analysis is wrong and flawed and is wasteful. But what we're saying in Agile is that, look, we'll deliver earlier, we'll be happier, and we'll deliver more, quicker, higher quality, but we're not going to get the domain right to start off with. So there's this thing called technical debt. Technical debt is not bad code. That's bad code. So if you've got bad code, it's because you wrote bad code. Technical debt is when you look at the domain, the way you've described the world, your understanding of the domain has changed because your requirements have changed, so you want to go back and refactor the code so that it better reflects your understanding of the domain. And largely that's what we're doing here, and we're using basic refactoring principles, and the only one we're really using is do not repeat yourself. So as Gwen said, we've got repeated code, so wherever I see repeated code, I'm just trying to eradicate it. So that's all I'm really doing. So that's what I think refactoring is, and technical debt, as a slight aside. So we agreed, I said that we were going to refactor this, so this is the bit I'm going to do first. So I think I can extract that into a function. So I will call my function iterator. I've never come up with a good name for this function, to be honest. And what I want to do is take this code in here. This is the bit where it can all go a bit Pete-tong. So we will comment out that. There's my Wizzy. Look at that. And we'll say that Roman numeral is equal to iterator. Now, I do baby steps for this one because this can end badly. I also spent about an hour last night trying to get this code to work, and I still don't know what I did wrong. But basically, deleting a line and then pasting the line was the fix. Just, honestly, which is never a satisfactory resolution for me. Because I'm expecting lots of test failures at this point. Yes, lots of test failures. Oh, we got one right. And that's kind of okay when you're doing kind of refactors, because I know my problem's all in here. So what we're going to do is we will pass in n, and we'll say that is n as integer. I'll talk a little bit about how VBA handles variables later, which might be of interest or not. And then we'll say here that while we'll leave that in, and then I'm forgetting my wonderful button. So it's no longer Roman numeral converter, it's now something called iterator. So iterator is equal to iterator plus I, n is equal to that. So that might just work. Just double check I haven't got a, okay, I'm pretty sure I haven't put an infinite loop in there. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, and 3 working. Cool. Everything else is kind of broken. And can anyone see why it's broken, or do you want me to fix it? Sorry? Prefixes? Yes, so all the V's and X's are broken.
You don't have the, so Roman numeral converter needs to be Roman numeral converter plus iterator.
Yep. And hopefully what you're seeing as well is all these types of mistakes that I'm making. And it might be because I'm not spending time understanding, you know, like I've said, I'm just letting the thing guide me. But all these typos in an untested world, however you do your testing, are perfectly, you know, it's completely reasonable that you would make these mistakes as a developer. And it's about the checks and measures we put in place to stop them progressing too far down the pipeline or ultimately going out the door. So I would now suggest that I would think that everything would pass again. So that's pretty cool. And I would, we can now delete that line of code. Now the reason we did this, we haven't actually really eliminated any code. So in terms of a refactor, we've probably got the same numbers of code. But I think I keep on saying we agreed as if, but my idea was I wanted to put this bit of code in as well into the same kind of pattern because it's X's rather than I's. So if I want to do that, I think I want to kind of, well, let's try doing, yeah, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'll split out the I. So we'll have a parameter here called Roman numeral character. And we'll now pass in I. So that is now Roman numeral character. So again, it's just to refactor the code, trying to make it a bit cleaner. Nothing's changed. I'll physically change the cell just to make sure. So now I think we're getting to the point where we might be able to do this here. So here we can say, oh, well, I actually need the boundary. So I've got a number 10 here, and I've got a number 1 here. So let's just factor out that bit of code as well. So boundary, no, sorry. So for the I, the boundary is 1. And so that's interesting. So before we do this refactor, do we need that? And I could go through now the code in my head and work out if I need it or not. Turns out I do need that. So, and interesting, the reason why we do need that is there. Again, this is something about TDD allows you to make changes to the code to improve the code, but you're doing it in a safe way. And again, you can see the consequences of making changes. And again, if you are refactoring code to make it better, if you can't make those changes safe and then confident and know the consequences, then you don't make the changes. The code just gets worse and worse. So I'm hoping that will fix that problem. And we've got a similar problem for 9. And the nice thing about that is even though it looks like we're going a little bit backwards, I'm kind of thinking, ooh, this code's now looking a lot similar to this code. Watch this space. So I've now changed that to make it a little bit simpler. And now what I want to do is I'm going to pass in that, what I call boundary. Boundary is a good name. So while that's bigger than boundary, so that should work. Again, you kind of do a refactor and nothing happens, it just works. I kind of like to see things broken, so again, I'm still deliberately forcing VBA to recalculate. I never really trust it's done it properly. So can we now, I seem to have lost my cursor, change this code here to Roman numerator. So I'm going to do the while 10, so I think it's 10, and I think it's X, and we'll comment out that line of code, lines of code. Does that work? Not quite. Okay. Does anyone know why it didn't work?
It was your, I think it was N -1.
Very good. So, I maximise again. We can get rid of that bit now. So these are interesting. They're fairly, a little bit icky. But what would happen? This is the same sort of thing. So can we do
missing the R off that copy
I'm missing the R off?
from Roman.
Oh yes. I don't think I got a warning for that either. I think it would have just, we'll run it and see. Oh no, that's a shortcut from Java. That's never going to work. Will I crash Excel? Will you crash Excel? No, it's me, isn't it? It's definitely me. So what feedback do we get? Oh, breakpoint not allowed. Get lots of failures. That's good. So everything's passing. Let me just tidy up the code again so I can show you what I've done. So we had this while loop in here, which we didn't really think about a great deal. We just it was just following the flow, I think. And we've changed all of that to that. And it's just worked. And I'm not saying it's magic, because obviously, I do understand what's going on. But sometimes that's enough for me. If the test is passed, I don't need to go away and intellectualize too closely what they've done. But also, if it does it for that, I'm pretty sure it'll also do it for 4. So I did do a refresh and it worked. Which means again do a so everything's passing. So this now, from a coding point of view, kind of works. And if we want to extend this on a little bit, maybe 30 might fail. No, that should be okay, I'd have thought. Maybe 40 with the first failure. Oh, well. Oh, of course, sorry. So 40 is the first failure. What is it, Excel? So, that's kind of the solution. So looking at that solution, I think a couple of things are interesting about this solution. Hopefully what you can see is the tests on the left, fairly clear. And I think there's an argument now where I might delete some of these tests and reduce it down to some of the edge cases. So I don't think you need from 1 to 40, but that's kind of a personal thing. The tests aren't long running. If you understand, so yeah, whatever. The code at the top, hopefully, is very easy to understand, fairly self-documenting. You can see the pattern and it's nice and easy. The code in the iterator is a little bit harder to understand. It's still fairly clean, but I would struggle to, if you showed me that code in a week's time, I would struggle to tell you it is a Roman numeral converter. But to some extent, that's not really important because it's the constraints, it's constrained by the above and the tests. So anyone who tries to refactor that iterator code is going to have a problem to do it without breaking tests. And that's something that you do get to see in TDD and refactoring of code, is that quite often the code gets harder to change because you've got the constraint of the tests. And that's actually a good thing. And you want code to kind of be documenting, but also clean. So that's largely the demonstration of TDD. I was going to go next door. I've kind of finished about 5 minutes ahead of where I wanted to be, which is amazing, probably because nothing crashed. So I was going to go next door and see if anyone wants to come back and see what they've delivered. I've got no idea what we'll see next door. I presume they won't have been able to progress quite as quickly as me, because I did spend all last night practicing doing this. So from the people that stayed in the room with me, was there any questions that you had about it? Did it all make sense?
So you said that you can remove the tests that, like, more boundary tests afterwards. Is that common, or do people leave them around most of the time, or does it depend on how the tests are?
I think I would probably leave all those tests there, and then I would then... There's no cost to these tests at the moment.
No.
So it's when there's a cost to the test that I think you talk about deleting them, although I know Ash might want to talk about, if a test is always passing, can I now delete it? I think it's a separate conversation. So I think with this, I would probably, the first 20 or 40 are fine, but then I might go on to... But that's a gut feel thing. And this is one of the hard things about TDD. So a lot of people say that TDD is easy, and just do it, just write your test first. But it's a skill. So it's a skill that takes time to develop, and it takes time to change your behaviors. And that's why people get frustrated and stop, and they go back to what they're used to doing, which is writing code and testing after. But I don't believe I would have got the same result if I'd have written the code first and tried to justify it later. But your point, I can't tell you, there isn't a right answer. I think you do start to get to a right answer if these were being... I think in unit tests it's a lot easier. If these were end-to-end tests that were taking a second to run, then I think I would say you'd allow 4 or something arbitrary, just to piss you off. But I would say the fewer the better. But again, that's not very helpful, is it?
Well, yeah, you don't always have the answer.
No, I'll admit that. I don't always have the answer. Yes?
What do you think the biggest blocker for a developer is when it comes to practicing TDD? What's stopping them getting into it straight off the bat?
I think it's all that thing. It's like, do you touch type? You can touch type.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was like learning?
It just sort of happened with me because I spent a lot of time pressing the keyboard.
Okay, maybe ask Leah and Shazza. You touch typing yet?
Not quite.
But you'd be quicker if you did touch type, and you stop learning. It's frustrating. So I read a book somewhere. Someone said that learning feels like frustration, and I think it is. I think developers are frustrated when they try and learn how to do it because we tell them it's simple, and it's not. It's a skill, but you need to learn. People think it's quicker to A, not write tests, or to B, write tests after. I would argue that's not the case. I don't think that's been proved definitively in any one direction. So that's my feeling, and it's the feeling of the developers I kind of respect, is that they would never write code without tests because they think it's quicker. Not everyone agrees with that, but what I would say is go away and learn to do it first, and then have the argument. Don't not learn how to do TD and tell me that it's quicker or slower to write tests with or without tests. I tried to teach myself unit testing and TDD, and I kind of failed the first 2 or 3 times I did it. And it was only when I had an environment, a work environment, where I got a lot of help and I read a lot of books about it that I kind of got it eventually. But it took a while.
So with the Roman numerals, you have Excel to work out what the expected result is.
Yes.
You have to sit down and think about what the test is, the expected result is.
Yep.
And you think that's kind of why some developers think if I dig into the code, then I'll work it out as I'm going along.
So I think TDD is a great opportunity to define the world. So any engagement where a developer doesn't know what the answer should be an opportunity to speak to one of or all of tester, the BA, business owner, domain expert. And I guess that's harder because this is quite a contrived example. So it's not just a ascending number. It is, what do I do when I put £10 in, £100, £1,000, £1,001? And again, choosing those edge cases is part of the skill. So it's about understanding where's the value. And I think as testers, there'll be a tendency for you to want to perm things out. So you'll probably want all of these tests plus more. What happens when I do XX and a half? And again, Romans didn't support halves. Like, no, but what happens if they do it? No, there is no half.
So, back to testers broke my heart conversation again.
Yes. So the other one as well is interesting is that you haven't got a zero, so I forgot to put that one in there. So the Romans don't have a concept of a zero. So we should have had a test for that towards the end, maybe.
Yeah, I think you asked that as well.
So yes, they have no zero, so it should be blank string, I think, is probably a good answer. So if you've got a test, then that's cool. I think that might test automatically. And again, it's about defining the world. So it's exactly that kind of use case. So, it's, you know, what does zero equal? Don't know, go away and work it out, and then write the test, and then make it do that. I don't know, what did any feedback from the guys and girls, people of all genders and, I'll stop now. So, how did you find it? I'm guessing you didn't get that far.
No.
Was it just a really frustrating experience?
I realise that VBA is absolutely shit.
Every return is a frustration, isn't it?
I think it was like, you need to write enough tests until you start seeing the pattern.
So I think that was one of the points I tried to make was I could feel the frustration, maybe only from me, was I forced myself to go to 8 before I actually started to refactor. And when I've done this before as like an audience participation, they've had me refactoring after 3. And that way lays madness. And again, this is another of the problems with test-driven development, and you need to let it take you further than you want to. So you almost need to write more code than you feel comfortable writing before the patterns drop out. So when I've done this with Andy Stewart, who a couple of you will know, he said that he refactors after 5 because he's seen 1, 2, 3, and I kind of get that. But if you're refactoring if you start to refactor too early, you make it worse. So you've got to trust the process, you've got to go further than you want to, and then look for the patterns. Because otherwise you're back into test after, because if you're trying to solve the problem after 2 or 3, you've gone too soon. And again, that's going back to your earlier point about why don't developers stick with it. It's that. Because in that world, writing unit tests isn't always a good thing. You know, so you can go away and write a shitload of the wrong unit tests, and you can have a load of brittle tests, and your code can be worse because of it. And you just constrain whoever comes up to pick the next mess by a load of unit tests, which will get deleted. So it's not, you know, just write tests or write good tests isn't very good advice. It's something you need to get better at. Any others?
So I often hear TDD is a design technique.
Well, hopefully that came there, because I think that code is quite clean. And so I think it is. I think if you let the test take... put you on the spot, but as I've forced you to write more and more tests, did you find that the code gets cleaner because of it? They're nodding, they're both nodding. And I think one of the reasons that...
I really want you just to say no.
They go, I hate you, David. And I think one of the reasons is because to allow yourself to do unit tests, you have to decouple the code in such a way where you can actually test it cleanly. And so that, breaking down into small functional points, kind of leads to cleaner, simpler code.
So what about if you're changing an existing code that hasn't been built?
So if you have a quite a common example, kind of got anyone from Hitachi, obviously Clem, but basically, you know, not uncommon is that they've got a world where you've got a legacy system that works, you know, it's basically running your business. And how do you modify that? So I think you have to start to write tests. Now what won't work is if you basically put 3 developers in a room and say, right, go and write 20,000 unit tests until you've got 90% test coverage, which is, I insist on 90% or higher test coverage on all work that's written front end and back end at Codera. What you would do in that situation is you would start to write some, what I would say, long-living unit tests. So you start to cover off your cheat, basically. You write a beginning and an end unit test that will maybe quickly give you 70% test coverage with like 3 tests. The area that you're about to refactor is where you then start to look for high test coverage. And what you'll find is that the changes that the business asks you to make are usually localized in certain areas. So wherever you're making the changes, you should start to get the test coverage up. So it's kind of a strategy where you need to define what the current behavior is in a long-running test, and then you then can do TDD for the new test, for the new work. So you should see that quality improves in groups and it'll improve where you're making changes. And then the bits that don't get changed probably work, and it's probably fine.
Yeah, it's okay to leave those alone.
Okay.
I kind of hear that's one of the common challenges I hear against it. Is using TDD. So, well, we've got an existing code base. So I try with a similar technique. It's like, we'll just write tests for what's changing, right? Because otherwise you're going to have to go back and try and understand the world, aren't you? As it was written 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, and
It's really hard.
there's lots of reasons. I've heard lots of reasons not to do TDD, and they include things like it takes longer, it's impossible with the code base, can't write tests in X framework. We've just done it in Excel. So, if I can get test coverage in Excel, I'm pretty sure I'll have 90% or higher test coverage with what I've just done, up to the numbers that I got to. So you can always do it, but it's about having those behaviors. And the way to fix those behaviors might just be you put sonar warnings on code that's committed, and you just say, I want code coverage to go up every time you commit code. And you just do that as a group. But the other thing is that teams need guidance to learn the skills to do it. So if you just take a team of 5 established developers who are writing no tests or writing some tests, typically developers left on their own would tend to start at about 60-70% test coverage, and then it'll slowly drop. You need to basically say it's got to be 90 or higher, which is an arbitrary number, but it's a better arbitrary number than 60 or 70%. But you also need to help them learn how to do it. And if you've just got a team that's never done it before, they will write brittle tests, they will test the wrong things, and they will find refactoring harder because they've kind of encapsulated the bad code in place. Does that make sense? Cool.
Awesome.
Oh, I just wanted to finish as well. If this talk's been interesting and you think it would be interesting to your place of work, then my email address is on the last slide. I haven't shown you. Send me an email and I'll happily come and spend a lunchtime working you people through it, or any team that you have you think might be interested in seeing that demonstration. Or do it yourself. It's good fun doing it yourself. But run through it the night before, and don't let the team do it because they will refactor too early.